Lesson 2, Variables. Investigate. At the conclusion of this lesson, you will be able to identify common programming patterns when using variables as part of an app. You'll also be able to explain the purpose of those programming patterns with variables, both in terms of how they work and what they accomplish. You'll be able to modify some apps that make use of common programming patterns with variables to adjust their functionality. Now, quick review. How does a baggie represent a variable? Well, remember in our previous lesson, the baggie represents a variable by storing one item, a value on a sticky note placed in a named baggie. The value in the baggie can be changed at any time, just like a variable's value can. However, remember, the baggie can only hold one value at a time. Now, you should be logged into code.org. You want to go to Unit 4, Lesson 2, Variables, Investigate, Level 2. What you're going to do is you're going to look at the Thermostat app, version 1. And by yourself, with a partner, depending on whether you're online, doing this all by yourself asynchronously because you missed the lesson or whatever, you're going to click, run, and observe what happens when you run this particular app. You can run it, and then you can use the up and the down arrows. Try clicking on different parts of the program screen. And then we're going to discuss, how does the app work? What are the variables? What's being stored? What's changing? So pause the video for a moment and do that. You're back. Okay, so when you run the app, predicting the information that is stored in the variables. What do you think is stored? What do you think is a variable? If you said the temperature, yeah, it's got to store the temperature. Whatever the temperature is, then you raise it or you lower it, and it's going to store the new temperature. Okay, move to level 3. Read the code. Specifically, look at lines 1 through 12. Note what is that doing, and then look at lines 14 through 21 and make a note of what that's doing. Again, you can run the code and look at those lines specifically. Take about 5 minutes writing down what those lines do. Okay, let's take a look. For lines 1 through 12, did you notice that at first you create and assign variables, temp and tempf? The two variables are created. Temp gets the value of 70 and tempf is set to an empty string, which is represented with empty quotation marks. Then on line 7, an on event is created for when the down button is clicked. And notice, these guys right here, these are comments. So this is for the human reader of the program. So on event, down button, clicked, what's going to happen? Well, the temperature, okay, the variable temp is going to be decreased by 1. And the tempf will get, it's going to take the new temperature and concatenate it with an F. Then the text on the screen is set to display the value stored in the variable tempf. And then the sound is played. What about lines 14 through 21? Well, this one is an on event button for up button. This makes the temperature go up 1, and then again concatenates the F, sets the text, and plays the sound. This is something that you need to learn how to do so that you can debug your programs. You're going to enter temp, the name of the variable you want to watch. So down here where it says watch, you can click on it and add a watch variable. And then it's going to tell you what that variable is as the program runs. So add temp, and then go to level 3, modify and change the degrees by 2 when the up arrow is clicked, and down when the up arrow or the down arrow is clicked. And remember that what you're doing is you're going to change this from temp +1 to temp +2. And the same thing for the down arrow. And then watch, okay? See what happens. This should only take about a minute or 2. So run the program a couple times, make those modifications. Now you're back. Let's see what's going on. I'm going to go to level 4. I want you to run the app. What's changed now? Well, hopefully you notice that you not only have 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you have 21 degrees Celsius. There's also the math.round command. Look at it. How do you think that works? I can tell you that it rounds to the nearest integer. Remove it. You can comment it out. Just put 2 slash marks in front of it in lines 3, 15, and 28. And what happens then? Know what happens then? Put it back. Okay? You've got to learn how to feel comfortable with changing and putting back. Modify. Change the code so that no space displays between the temperature and the unit descriptor F or C. Go ahead and go into level 4. Before you start working, go ahead and do these things. We're going to take about 2 or 3 minutes and do that. Okay, let's move on to level 5. I want you to run the app and predict the information that is being stored in the variables, and then look at it running. Then go to level 6. I want you to read the code, what has changed and what has stayed the same. I want you to think about, how does get text work? Modify, add an exclamation. Exclamation. I don't know why that says explanation. It should be exclamation point to the end of the string stored in username, so the following is displayed on the screen. Home thermostat app, hi Lola, with an exclamation point. Okay, take about 7 minutes. Do levels 5 and 6. Okay, now that you're back, first off, how does get text work? It gets the string of text that is found in the element with the given ID. In this case, the ID is name input. In our app, the name written in the name input element is concatenated with hi and then stored in the variable my name. We're learning about 2 patterns here. We're looking at this, the counter pattern with event and the variables with string concatenation. The counter pattern with the event is a common pattern for updating variables that you will use in making many different apps. We call it the counter pattern with event. What does it look like? Well, variable myvar. Myvar is set to 0. When onEvent ID is clicked, it's going to take and replace myvar with myvar plus 1. So it's incrementing it by 1. Every time the ID is clicked, okay, the event is triggered, myvar is updated, getting the current value of myvar and adding 1 to it. The counter pattern with event may be used to update a score in a game when an item is clicked, a grade, if you're counting points that you've earned, things like that. Variables can store many different types of information, including numbers and strings. Anything placed inside the quotation marks becomes a string. Well, guess what? There's a pattern for working with strings. When we want to combine strings with other strings, numbers, or even with another variable, we call it concatenation. Variable with concatenation, with string concatenation. You have my string is set to rock. My other string is set to roll. If I want to say rock and roll, I'm going to set my story to my string. I'm going to concatenate it with quote, space, and space, quote. Do notice the spaces before and after the word and then my other string. If I didn't put those strings in, it would literally come out rock and roll with no strings. Okay? So it's just a way of putting together sentences. Now, the patterns you've learned today are present in many different kinds of apps. As we learn new patterns, they will show up in the Help and Tips tab at the top of your screen on programming levels. Let's review. What can be stored in a variable? So far, you've learned to store numbers and strings. Why is using a meaningful name for a variable important? Well, it's important so that you can remember what it is, what it's used for, so that somebody else who maybe needs to debug or update your code can figure out what's going on. In real life, you might write a program and you'll support it for some period of time, but then you will probably move on to another job. You will get promoted. You'll move to a whole new company, whatever. Somebody else has got to support the code that you wrote. So it's in the company's best interest to have some rules set up, and most companies do, about how things are named. And using meaningful names is extremely important. It also keeps you from not getting confused about your own code. Now, a variable. What is a variable? It's a reference to a value or expression that can be used repeatedly throughout a program. A variable is a container that holds a value. Now, you're going to practice with variables. You're going to practice creating them and modifying them and tracing what happens to them throughout a program.